The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Sandra Loy from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Today's webinar will feature tools and resources available for state decision makers, specifically those in the Alternative Fuels Data Center, as well as the Sled, or State and Local Energy Data Tool. Today's webinar is hosted by Clean Cities in cooperation with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the National Association of State Energy Officials, the National Governors Association, and the National Conference of State Legislators. For those not as familiar with Clean Cities advances the nation's economic, environmental, and energy security by supporting local actions to reduce petroleum consumption and transportation through its national network of nearly 100 Clean Cities coalitions. In a moment, I will turn the webinar over to our moderator, Ms. Cassie Powers, from the National Association of State Energy Officials, to introduce the webinar further, as well as our two speakers. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar. As noted at the start of the webinar, all attendees are in listen-only mode and will remain so through the entirety of the webinar. When you logged into today's webinar, by default, you'll be set to listen in using your computer speaker system. If you'd prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. We are recording today's webinar and a link will be emailed out to all of today's participants later this week. We will be hosting a Q&A session at the conclusion of all the presentations. We encourage you to submit questions as the presentations are taking place. You can do so by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. We will collect these and address them during the question and answer session at the end of today's presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ms. Cassie Powers. Cassie, you may begin.
Hello all, and thank you to NREL for hosting our webinar today. My name is Cassie Powers, and I am with the National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASEO. For those who are new to us, NASEO is the Association for the Governor-Designated State Energy Directors from the states and territories in the U.S. NASEO works on behalf of the state energy offices to serve as a liaison between the states and federal energy offices, also provides analytical and research help and support to the state energy offices, as well as convene our energy offices and directors at conferences and events. We've had the pleasure of growing our transportation program in the past couple of years. We've worked closely with NREL as well as NGA and NCSL on a variety of topics, and working through the Clean Cities program has been particularly instrumental to our work. On our presentations today, we're going to hear from a couple of speakers who are going to highlight some of the new tools and resources available for states on the AFDC website. I know that in our work, the AFDC site has been really key. It's a great place to go to for information and updates on state laws and incentives. It also has great information on the different types of fuels that are available for transportation, how they work, environmental aspects, economic impacts and benefits, et cetera. So I'm excited to hear about some of the updates from the AFDC site. As I mentioned, we're going to hear from a couple of our speakers. Alexis Hayowitz from ICF will walk us through the recently revamped state information pages on the AFDC website. In addition to the AFDC tools and resources, Darlene Stewart from NREL will demonstrate the Sled, or State and Local Energy Data Tool. We've already gone over a couple of the housekeeping items, so just a reminder, we're going to hold our questions until the end of the call. You can feel free to send them in through the box on your screen throughout our presentations, and then at the end we will explore those questions. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Alexis from ICF International, and she can take it away.
Great. Thanks, Cassie. So as Cassie said, today I'm going to talk about the resources available from the AFDC. It was great to have that short intro to see sort of how you guys are using the information. Hopefully we can take a little bit of a deeper dive there. So before I do so, make sure I can, Okay. I wanted to back up and mention Clean Cities, and since the AFDC is sort of part of the overall Clean Cities mission. And as Sandra mentioned, Clean Cities is a program of the U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE. And the Clean Cities mission shown here aligns with DOE's overall mission. It is to advance the energy, economic, and environmental security of the United States by supporting local actions to cut petroleum use in transportation. So over the years, Clean Cities has kept up with the rapidly changing industry on its mission to cut petroleum use, but consistently focused on the three strategies shown in the triangle here. So in green, you see replace. That's replace petroleum with alternative and renewable fuels, including biodiesel, electricity, ethanol, or E85, hydrogen, natural gas, propane, and other emerging fuels. Moving around in blue, reduce petroleum consumption through smarter driving practices and fuel economy improvements. And in orange, eliminate petroleum use through idle reduction and other fuel-saving technologies and practices. And all of these activities sort of have the end goals of reducing petroleum use and also reducing GHG, or greenhouse gas emissions. So Clean Cities accomplishes those goals through 4 major activities shown here. In the upper left, we have local community coalition support and partnership development. As Sandra mentioned, Clean Cities convenes community and business leaders to develop and implement projects, leverage resources, and address local barriers, and does so through about 100 Clean Cities coalitions that are on the ground in your states and communities. Later on, I'll show you a way to find contact information for your local coalition if you're not already in touch with them. They are absolutely excellent resources, so we absolutely suggest that you get in touch with them. Next, moving around the web here is competitively awarded financial assistance. Clean Cities utilizes federal cost share to encourage private sector investment. This will come up a bit later as well. Moving around technical and problem-solving assistance, Clean Cities experts help local leaders address permitting and safety issues, technology shortfalls, and basically all project implementation barriers related to alternative fuels. And last but certainly not least is the data-driven public information, outreach, and education. Clean Cities develops tools to help consumers save money on fuel costs and fleets understand their options for cost-effective alternatives to gasoline and diesel. The AFDC falls into this last bucket in the upper right here, this data-driven public information, education, and outreach bucket. In the bottom right corner is the Clean Cities website. Before I move on, just definitely wanted to point that out. We're not going to look at the Clean Cities website today in our demo, but I absolutely encourage you to go check it out. So the AFDC is maintained by Clean Cities at the national level, specifically by NREL, or the National Renewable Energy Lab, who are hosting our webinar today. The mission of the website is to collect, analyze, and distribute data used to evaluate alternative fuels and vehicles. The website houses a extensive collection of information, data, and tools related to all of the technologies and fuels we talked about earlier in that triangle. So on the AFDC, as Cassie said, you can find a variety of basic information about alternative fuels, including production and distribution, specifications, R&D, benefits considerations, station locations, vehicle availability, emissions, laws, and incentives. The AFDC is also home to some of the most widely used Clean Cities tools, including the station locator, which you see on the header bar here, the maps and data tool, petroleum reduction calculators, vehicle searches, publication searches, and all of these tools can actually be found in the upper right corner, the orange box around the little tools link. All of those tools that I just mentioned can be found by going to that tools link. So if you're going to bookmark a page, I always say bookmark that tools page because it's great. It's a great resource. Today we're actually going to talk about 2 of those tools in particular. Information by state, which is another orange box in the bottom right corner, and then the laws and incentives page, which is in the upper top navigation. So before I move into my live demo, in case I forget to put this back up at the end, I will try to remember. Here's my contact information, as well as the technical response service, or the TRS contact information. ICF International actually maintains the TRS, which is an inquiry response service available to stakeholders and others with questions about Clean Cities portfolio items. We can respond to the most simple or the most challenging question about alternative fuels, and we can be reached at technicalresponse@icfi.com or the phone number here. ICF also maintains the laws and incentives database that we're going to talk about today, as well as the alternative fueling station locator. So if you have comments on those tools or new stations to add to the station locator database or new laws or incentives to add to the laws and incentive database, this technical response email address is a great place to go with those, and we can get those tools updated very quickly. But in fact, if you have questions about any of the, or comments about any of the tools that we talk about, any of the websites today, feel free to reach out to me or the TRS, and we can pass those along to NREL as necessary. So in the big blue box, this is the website we're going to go to right now if all of our technical works out okay. So this is the AFDC main page that you saw in the slides, afdc.energy.gov. And we are going to go down to our bottom right corner here that I highlighted earlier, this information by state button. And these are the state information pages, which have been recently updated and we think will be very useful tools for state decision makers like yourself. They compile state-specific information from several useful resources within and outside of the AFDC. We'll talk about a lot of tools today that are all of their information is sort of compiled into a state information page, but when you have a chance after the webinar to go back and explore the AFDC, I encourage you to check out all of those individual tools because they are constantly being updated, new information, new tools and resources. But these state information pages sort of compile all the necessary information for the state in question in one place. So we're actually going to focus on or look at Colorado today, and all the pages look very similar, but we'll use Colorado because that's where NREL is located. So as you can see here, the page is broken down into several different boxes, these gray boxes with different sets of information. But before we dive into those, I did want to point out that we clicked into Colorado on that main page, but no need to go back there. If you wanted to go look at another state, you can use this drop down in the upper right corner and find another state you might be looking for. So laws and incentives, which has come up a couple times, and we're actually going to circle back to the laws and incentives, but I did want to mention the information that's here on the state page in the upper left corner. So as you can see here, there's a count of the number of laws and incentives in Colorado related to alternative fuels. There's 26. Underneath that, you can see recent updates and additions. So new programs or recently updated programs, incentives, laws related to alternative fuels here. So you could click into this CNG school budget matching grants link and find a description of that program. I also wanted to point out that the LNI, or the Laws and Incentives box, has this data download. You can go there and download a spreadsheet of all of the laws and incentives related to alternative fuels that are in the database or some subset. So you could go there and download just all the Colorado laws and incentives or all of the grants or all of the PEV, plug-in electric vehicle related incentives. So that data download is a nice place to go if you're looking for a spreadsheet versus an online website. Moving over into fueling stations, this data is actually pulled from the most popular tool in the AFDC, the fueling station locator. Here you can find a total count of the number of fueling stations in Colorado, close to 500. And underneath you see all the different fuel types. Note that biodiesel is B20 and above, and then all the rest of the fuel types here, and you can see the breakdown of public and private. The only other note I wanted to say here is that electric is electric vehicle charging infrastructure locations, not necessarily outlets. The number is considerably larger if you were looking at the number of outlets. And if you were to click on each of these links, it would bring you to the station locator database or website and pre-populated search for all of the compressed natural gas, for instance, stations in Colorado. There's also a data download available for the fueling station locator, so you can get a spreadsheet of some subset of the stations or all of the stations in the database. So the other thing I wanted to mention about the fueling station locator, because it comes up quite often, is that there is an iPhone app available, as well as coming soon an Android app. And the other thing is that there's a widget available for the station locator. And if you're not familiar with a widget, it basically allows the station locator tool to live within your website. So users of your website can use the station locator and all the most up-to-date information without ever leaving your page. And you can provide that widget information to your web developers, and they could pop it right onto your website. So last in the top row is those Clean Cities coalitions I talked about earlier. It includes all of the coalitions in Colorado. Some states are like Colorado, where there's actually multiple. And then there are other states where one coalition covers the whole state, and that would be, for instance, Arkansas or New Hampshire. And you can click into these links, and it will bring you to a website that shows you Clean Cities coordinator contact information, as well as statistics about the coalition, where their territory lies, all the useful information that you need to have in order to connect with your local coalition. So again, these are excellent resources for you. The coordinators across the country, we strongly recommend that you get in touch with them if you haven't already. So moving down, we're going to get into some of the real data that's on these pages about transportation, fuel consumption, and alternative fuels. So this first box here is a dynamic graph of transportation fuel consumption for the state, including gasoline, diesel, propane, natural gas, and electricity. And you can use this drop-down list here to select the fuel types that you're interested in. So you can see gasoline here is pre-populated, but you could go see electricity and see over time how the amount of fuel consumption has changed. So little to none up until the early 2000s, a spike, a dip, and then a rise again. And all of these are on gasoline gallon equivalents, which allows you to easily compare the fuels on an energy content basis. This download link right here allows you to download an image of this graph. So if you wanted to use it in a presentation or a document, as long as it's properly cited, that information or those image downloads are available here, as well as the source. And all of these boxes on the state information page actually have the source of information. So this is the Energy Information Administration State Energy Data System, and you could actually link right there and see where all this data is coming from. Moving on to the fuel production box here, this is summarizes the series of gasoline, diesel, natural gas, and electricity fuel production data points for the state. All of this information is pulled from the Biofuels Atlas, which will come up again later. But the Biofuels Atlas actually draws from a number of different sources, including EIA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and industry associations. You can actually use this link here to get right into the Biofuels Atlas and see more specific information for your state. That page actually it's a map-based tool that allows you actually to pull data on your specific state as well. Moving down, here is the case studies box. One of the things we hear all the time from fleets in particular considering alternative fuels is that they need to see case studies of successful deployments and lessons learned. So the AFDC has an entire database devoted to those case studies. And this state information page actually pulls together those that are local to this state. So there are several case studies here for Colorado, and you could click into them and see, the text version of the case study. Although a lot of them have really relevant statistics on petroleum reduction and emissions reduction, the number of vehicles being used, so on and so forth. And some of them actually include a point of contact so that you could reach out, or a fleet could reach out and get more information. The bottom here is the link to the case studies database. So if you didn't see one in your state that's relevant, you could go to this case studies database and search for another kind of case study that was somewhere else in the country. Similar to case studies are these videos. Clean Cities has a partnership with the Maryland Public Television's Motor Week series. So the Motor Week producers travel around the country and work with Clean Cities coalitions to produce short video segments on alternative fuel success stories. So you can see here there are several that are local to Colorado, and you can actually watch them right here on the state information page without even leaving the website. So back to some of the data. Here we have the regional fuel prices. Another very popular tool maintained by Clean Cities is the Alternative Fuel Price Report. And this box summarizes those prices by region. So this is actually the Rocky Mountain region, not specifically Colorado. And you can, on the right here, check and uncheck the different fuel types represented. So you could see, for instance, just natural gas versus gasoline here and be able to compare them over time. You can see how this data might be combined with the data above about production to sort of see how, or sorry, the data about fuel use to see how prices might affect fuel use over time. This information is all on a gasoline gallon equivalent basis, so energy content, again, taken into account. And you can actually go down here at the bottom and click into the alternative fuel price report to see the PDF files. All of this data here is collected by Clean Cities coalitions around the country. One other thing I wanted to point out is if you go up here, you can click on data and actually see the most recent price report. Moving on to the bioenergy production and infrastructure, you can see here, as I said earlier, the biofuels out list would pop up again, and here it is. The box summarizes information about ethanol and biodiesel production as well as biopower plants in Colorado. Moving right along, one of the things, as you can imagine, as plug-in electric vehicles become more popular, we get a lot of questions about life cycle or well-to-wheel emissions, greenhouse gas emissions of these vehicles, and that's a question that you may get as well. So that's what this box here is designed to answer that question. The box shows the grid mix, so the electrical grid mix for Colorado based on EPA data. As you can see, coal makes up the largest portion, and then we've got different portions for gas and oil and hydro in Colorado. And what you see on the right is a graph that uses that data to compare the life cycle emissions for the different fuel vehicle types. So all electric, PHEV, HEV, and gasoline. And as you can see here, because coal is such a large portion in Colorado, we actually get higher life cycle GHG emissions from the all-electric and plug-in electric than the hybrid, though all three are significantly less gasoline. Earlier in that web that I showed you, I mentioned that there's a funding aspect to Clean Cities, and that's sort of what this box over here on the right covers. Clean Cities actually works with organizations around the country in grants and cooperative agreements to deploy alternative fuels and to encourage market adoption in other ways. This transportation box includes the national parks in particular. Clean Cities funds national parks to deploy alternative fuels and also deploy charging stations and that kind of thing for the public that are coming into the parks. And as you can imagine, Colorado is a big hotspot for those types of projects. We've got 3 here. And we also have 2 other grant and cooperative agreement programs here that Clean Cities has funded in the state of Colorado, so electric vehicle community readiness and alternative fuel markets. You can click on these links to find out more about any number or any one of these projects. Lastly, on the state information pages is this more resources box, and some of these resources may be very familiar to you. Those of you at NASIO see the NASIO pages here. We've also got the State Energy Office, State Energy Plan, the Colorado data available from EIA, as well as some other alternative fuels data center and NREL websites. So as we were putting this webinar together, that's the state information page, but as we were putting this webinar together, we heard that the laws and incentives data may be particularly helpful for you guys, and there have been some improvements recently to that website. So I want to give you a quick overview, and I'm sensitive to our time, but I want to give you a quick overview of the laws and incentives page so you can come back and take a look at it. This is the main laws and incentives page, and you may have seen that I clicked on the top header bar here. Laws and incentives. So in the green, you can see you can link to a list of federal laws and incentives related to alt fuels. In the blue, allows you to select a state and see the state summary. Also on this main page, you see a search, which we'll come back to in a minute, the tables, which we'll also cover. You can read key federal legislation that has shaped alternative fuel policy. So the Energy Policy Act, there's a description of, or a summary of the Energy Policy Act of 1992, and then all of the subsequent legislation that sort of shaped the policy of Clean Cities, and then more broadly alternative fuels. And you can also see examples of local laws and incentives. So, and on the right here, sorry, I also want to point out that you can see a list of recently updated state descriptions, maps and data related to alternative fuels, case studies of successful alternative fuel incentive and law programs. This is something we're trying to build this database of case studies because we've found that they've been very useful to state decision makers and publications that sort of go over trends in state policy. So I'm going to briefly into Colorado here, go with that since we were looking at them already. And here's your Colorado list of laws and incentives, and I'll just plug into this PEV and EVSE grants program so you can see an example description. As you can see, the description summarizes the grant, the incentive amounts, gives a link to the actual program website down here at the bottom. It gives a legislative reference and a point of contact. So this laws and incentives database can be very helpful. And back out to the state page, we also have expired laws and incentives, points of contact, clean cities, coalitions, information about the state legislative session and once it meets or when it meets. We actually update all of the laws and incentives or revisit all the laws and incentives descriptions on an annual basis, typically right after the legislative session ends. I also wanted to show you these state summary tables on the left, which kind of break down the different descriptions in the database by across the top here: fuel, technology, incentives, regulations, user type. So say you wanted to find all of the biodiesel related descriptions in Arkansas. You could go here, click on this number 5, and it would bring you to a list of all of those Arkansas-based biodiesel incentives and laws. Same goes if you wanted to look for grants available in California. You could go to incentives tab, go to grants, and down to California and find the 14 grants in California that relate to alternative fuels. And one last page within laws and incentives is this search page. So if you're trying to, say, develop a rebate program in your state and you want to know what all of the states have done across the country on PEV rebate programs, electric vehicle rebate programs, you could go and use this search to do so. So you would select all jurisdictions. You might want to drop out federal since you're not so interested in that. Click EVs, PHEVs, and HEVs. Go down and find rebates under incentive and regulation type, and say you want to know the rebates for vehicle owners or drivers. So under the user, you would select that. And then you come down here to search. And what would pop up is a full list of all of the rebate programs across the country. So you could click into these and find out what these different states are doing and points of contact as possible and that kind of thing. I also wanted to point out that the database does include utility and private incentives, so you'll see some of those pop up here. So that is the search. So I will turn it over, I guess, back to Cassie or to introduce Darlene, but I'll be available for questions afterwards.
Excellent. And thanks, Alexis, for that helpful overview. It's great to see these improvements being made to AFDC, and I'm sure that they are going to be helpful to the folks on the phone. We did have a couple of questions. We're going to hold on to those until the end of the presentations during our Q&A. Just a reminder to folks on the phone, please feel free to send in questions throughout the presentations, and we will plan to get to those at the end. So with that, we'll move on to our next presentation from Darlene Stewart at NREL, who's going to demonstrate the state and local energy data tool. Darlene?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to talk to you a little bit today about the state and local energy data tool. My mouse is not working here. Hello. I'm not quite sure what was going on there. Sorry about that. So the state and local energy data tool is really focused on providing energy data and tools for folks that are doing energy planning in their community. And Alexis just really talked to us about the AFDC and gave us some really good information about, detailed information about transportation sector. The state and local energy data tool really it compiles information about a variety of different energy sources and uses within the community. So it tries to give a little bit more of a global view, but also we wanted to keep it focused as much as possible on the community level. So data that we'll present in the tool is either both, or it can be at the state level if we were not able to get more detailed information at the local level, but where possible, we'll also present it at the local level. So the real goal here is to support sustainability and resilience and disaster planning, and I'll talk a little bit about that in more detail a bit later. The strategic planning that we're talking about is really can be very specific, maybe oriented towards increasing the number of electric vehicles, say, in the community, or it could be much more global in terms of doing a sort of a statewide, say, sustainability plan. So the kind of fundamental idea behind the tool is to provide energy data that is both relevant to sustainability and resilience planning, and also focused at the community level, as I mentioned. We want to keep this tool relatively straightforward and simple. There's a lot of data out there. And I think one of the things that we heard from people was that it was very easy to get lost in all this data and to have a hard time sorting it out. So one of the real goals of the Sled tool is to provide summary data that is relevant but is not too much. But I wanted to point out that, and I put a sort of both way arrow on the left-hand side of this slide, that this kind of goes both ways. If you really want more data regarding a particular graph or chart or whatever, we always provide the source information, and a lot of those sites, for example, one of them is the AFDC state pages. We also get a lot of information from EIA, the U.S. Census Bureau. A lot of those sources have just a fabulous amount of information, and we certainly encourage folks to go and check those out and get additional data if they want. The Sled tool kind of provides an aggregate for all these different energy sources. So I did want to mention one other thing that's kind of a new feature of Sled, and that is this local level data that I show here at kind of the bottom of the slide here. The sources for those data are very similar to the sources that we've been using for state level data, for example, the EIA. But we've been doing some analysis with that and trying to disaggregate that down to the community or city level. So throughout the tool, in the future, we will have this aggregated data shown, and I'll point out to you how to recognize which data that is. Currently, we only have one data set that's presented that way, but in the future, we'll start to build that out more. And so you'll be able to see, for example, energy use data at a much more local level, which I think will be tremendously helpful to folks. So with that, I think I am going to skip to the tool, and we'll just go ahead and log into the tool and kind of cruise around. We'll go sledding. So I'm going to try Phoenix, Arizona, because it has some interesting features from an energy standpoint. So when you first log into the state and local energy data tool, you see this page, which is the electricity generation summary page. And one thing I want to point out that's new in Sled is we've added some detail in our left navigation here, which gives us a sort of table of contents that you can follow. As we add more and more data to the tool, we want to make sure it's easy to navigate through and be able to find things. So we've added these subheadings to each section so that it's a little bit easier to find your way. Another thing that I want to point out is that, again, as Alexis mentioned, for the state pages, you don't have to go back out to that main splash page to get to look at a different city. You can just enter different city here if you like. I also wanted to point out that we have a little map here, and this shows you, it's a little bit hard to see, but this shows you the actual city boundaries of the location that you selected. And that will be increasingly important for the tool in the future as we start to add this more disaggregated local level energy use data. We need to know exactly what we're talking about in terms of the city boundaries. So we added this little map here. This also helps if you just, for example, want to type in a zip code. Sometimes you may mistype that or not remember the exact zip code for the location you're looking for. Or in this case, this is my hometown zip code, but it also includes Ward, Colorado, which really, that's not what I was thinking. I want Boulder, Colorado. And so we've added this kind of enhanced navigation so that we can really home in on, excuse me, on the location that we're really interested in. So if we go back to Phoenix, you see that the page refreshes with data now from Phoenix. So if we just, I think for the remainder of the time, I'll just kind of step through the pages here, and we can talk about each one individually. So the first thing we have here, and this is, if for those of you who are familiar with the Sled tool, this is really unchanged from what we had before. This gives us the utility name for this region, the city that we're looking at, and also the electricity, both residential, commercial, and industrial electricity rates for that utility. This information can be difficult to find, and so we felt that this was an important thing to add here. This comes from the utility rate database, which we have a link to here. And if you're interested in getting very detailed information about utility rates, I would encourage you to go there. Another feature here is that you can download the chart. You can either print it or you can have it exported as an Excel file, as a CSV file. And we have that on pretty much everything within the tool, so that you can download the information and make your own reports or incorporate the data into your own analysis and so forth. So the next section in the electricity generation section is state and national retail electricity rate trends, and this is over the period of 2001 to 2014. You can see if you highlight each of these, you can see the data for that particular year. Again, this is from the Energy Information Administration. We also have fuel sources, and Alexis showed you this same chart essentially for Colorado. This one is for Arizona. We also included in here the national electricity sources data, and that's for comparison so that you can see, for example, Arizona has quite a lot of nuclear, which is I actually didn't know that. They also have quite a lot of solar, which is very interesting. So in a lot of cases, we tried to include national data where the comparison was a valuable thing to have. So moving on down, again, this is information that has been in the Sled tool for a while. So this is the electricity demand by sector. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the energy efficiency section, which is next. So again, there's this left navigation here where you can look at the different sections individually or skip directly to them. Energy intensity is an interesting measure. This is thousands of BTUs in $2005. So essentially, this is total economy-wide energy use and total economy-wide economic output. So these charts that we show here are not particularly useful in and of themselves, but they're wonderfully valuable as comparison to other states and localities. This is essentially an indication of the amount of heavy industry that you have in your state. Most states, residential energy use and so forth does vary with climate, but it tends to be dwarfed a little bit by industrial energy use. And so Arizona here you see is lower than the national average. If we go to a state like Michigan, for example, with Detroit's steel industry, you'll see that the energy intensity is higher there. So this is valuable information, and again, we have the source for that. This is here. We also have energy efficiency policies and incentives, and these are from the Desire database that Alexis talked a little bit about. If you click on each individual one of these highlighted titles, you will be taken to the OpenEI database, and this is a wiki database that is funded by DOE and administered by NREL. It provides a wealth of information on energy information, and I would definitely encourage you to take a look at it. Then we also have, again, for each section, we have some resources. These are mostly documents. So the next section is renewable energy. I won't talk too much about that. We have some maps here that show renewable energy potential, and we have various of those. For example, if we look at onshore wind in the Phoenix area, we can see how much wind is there, and also there's some wind farms in that area. And then if we move on to transportation, this is I think this is very funny because now we have another look at the alternative fuels station locator, and since Alexis kind of really gave us lots of information about this, I won't focus too much on this. But this is a great example of the widget idea. We pulled this in from the alternative fuels data center. So if you're interested in incorporating this as a widget, this is kind of how it's done. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have some of what we're calling aggregated data, and this again from that first slide that I showed you is data that's much more focused on the local level. And the first data set that we have that we've developed this way is the transportation data, or the number of alternative fuel vehicles in Phoenix. So we have the total number of vehicles, and the chart on the left gives you kind of the sort of the overall breakdown. So the vast majority are gasoline vehicles, and then we have alternative fuel or other types of fuel vehicles in the smaller wedge. And if we break out that smaller wedge, we get the breakdown of the number of vehicles that are different alternative fuel type vehicles. So this is data that was taken from R.L. Polk and Company. They collect information from car registrations, and basically they're the go-to database for all things vehicles. They do not necessarily have data at the specific city level for us, and so we use that data and did some analysis on it to narrow that down to the actual Phoenix city limit kind of area. So this is kind of a unique analysis that really provides some additional information about a unique area. The Polk data is not really publicly available. It's something subscribed to, and so this is a way to get a view of that information. And as I said, we'll be incorporating various data sets like this into Sled in the future. So you'll see a little tag here at the top that says aggregated, and then it gives a little description down at the bottom of what we actually did with the data. So this is I think is going to be a really helpful addition to Sled. One of the things that we're looking at doing in the future is adding a sort of alternative fuels or alternative vehicles, alternative fuels market analysis into Sled. So this would be sort of a dynamic analysis that would take this information about the alternative fuel vehicles that are already in the area, the alternative fuel stations that we saw from the station locator database, and also things like what those local laws and incentives are, what fuel prices are, and so forth, and look at doing an analysis that kind of gives an overview of what the alternative fuel market might be in that area, which would help people really focus on, should we really be focusing on electric fuel vehicle or electric vehicles? Should we be focusing on natural gas vehicles and so on? So that that's kind of what we have now. As I mentioned, we'll definitely be adding more information, especially to this section, and I'm really looking forward to the alternative fuel markets analysis. We also have transportation fuel costs, and this is again from the AFDC database that Alexa. So, and this is from the state pages, so if you're interested in getting more information there, definitely go to the state pages and check that out. And again, policies, incentives, and again, those are also from the AFDC state pages. So there's a variety of kind of resources and tools here. For example, the plug-in vehicle readiness scorecard is one of the tools that I think is definitely worth checking out. And also the EPA's fleet tool, which is the alternative fuel life cycle environmental impact tool that EPA puts out. So both of those are definitely worth checking out. Again, as I mentioned, Sled is really designed to provide some kind of summary information. And if the focus of your study or the plan that you're developing really requires more detail, the idea is that you'll be able to drill down into and to get that information, but that it's presented at a more summary level and a little bit easier to digest level here in the Sled tool. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the community planning pages, and then I will turn it over to questions. I think we're almost out of time. So we'll just wait for our data to load here. The community planning pages, we've been working on those to kind of focus them on sustainability and resilience planning, and to provide some kind of background information for each community. There are really, as you know, two kind of aspects of the sort of state background that really affect energy use. First of all is climate, of course. And so we've added some climate data here from NOAA. And this is heating degree days and cooling degree days. And you can see, for example, this is Phoenix. And if you get rid of, say, the heating, and you get rid of the heating nationally, you can see the comparison between Phoenix, the summertime cooling needs in Phoenix far outstrip the national average. This is useful information for both sustainability and resilience planning. For example, this might be a good opportunity for an energy efficiency in air conditioning kind of program. So we're also planning on adding additional demographic and economic kind of background data, and again that sort of goes towards this idea of providing information for sort of more global sustainability planning. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy and Sandra.
Excellent. Thanks, Darlene. It's great to see there's all of this information available for both state and local governments. We have quite a few types of questions that have come through, and so I'm going to pose them in the order that they were sent in. So Alexis, I'm going to start with a couple for you. I'm wondering, how do you get a station added to the map, the AFDC map?
So if you go into the station locator, there's an add or report a station link in the upper right corner of the map. I don't have control, but do I now? Oh, yes, I do. Okay. So you can go right here, submit new station, and this I got to by the top pane here. Or you can email the technical response service, which is the technical response at ICFI email address. And we do suggest that if you have multiple stations to submit, email us. We'll send you a spreadsheet, and we'll do it that way. That way you're not filling in a form multiple times for multiple stations.
Excellent. And on that note, does the AFDC or ICF provide access to research questions and answers by a TRS?
We do. Let's see. We do like a question of the month that's posted on the Clean Cities blog, which would be like a frequently asked question. But as far as publishing the question and answer for every single question that we get in, we don't. But if there was a question about the types of things that people are asking about or any specific question that people asked about, we'd be happy to provide that information. Just reach out to us. I'm not sure if that answers.
Great, thank you. All right, and Darlene, we have a couple questions for you as well. Does NREL track consumption of the different blends of ethanol and biodiesel in each state?
No, we get that data from that's actually the Clean Cities data in terms of the usage. I believe EIA tracks that data.
Okay. All right. Another question for Darlene. Do you have the energy intensity for each fuel in each state? This might have been covered earlier, but if you could please repeat it.
The energy intensity that we are showing in the Sled tool right now is an economy-wide energy intensity, and it really incorporates all of the different fuels. So it's not only transportation, but also electricity consumption and natural gas consumption for heating and things like that. Energy intensity is in transportation fuels. You can look at the miles per BTU essentially. and the greenhouse gas emissions model, the GREET model that Argonne has, does that. We do not have that in the Sled tool currently.
Great. Just a reminder to folks on the phone that if you do have any questions for the panelists, you can send them in through the question box online. And we do have another question for Darlene. Does the information through a linked widget automatically update when the source updates?
Yes, actually, that's the beauty of setting it up this way. We use what are called application interfaces that are machine-to-machine communications that we're actually able to tap into, for example, the EIA's database or the NOAA database. And so all of the information that we get is it's gone and retrieved live. So that's why sometimes, like for example, this chart for the heating degree days and cooling degree days took a moment to load. That was because we were going out to NOAA and getting that information and bringing it back. So it's all the information that we're presenting is completely up to date.
Great. So also just a question on how frequently data is updated. I was wondering, how often is the vehicle registration information updated?
Well, I don't know. I think Polk updates that information very frequently. But we have a subscription kind of service with them, and so we get data in kind of chunks from them, and I am not sure how frequent that is. I can look into that.
Great.
But it's more than once a year.
All right. Then we have a question from a participant. What's the process for posting incentives on the Laws and Incentives webpage?
So on an annual basis, we do a sweep of each state. So it typically is right after the legislative session ends. We search a number of keywords in the legislation, each state's legislative page to find new incentives and laws, and then we go back to each of the descriptions and we confirm them in the code on the state websites, that kind of thing. We also reach out to the Clean Cities coordinators in each state for updates, and we reach out to we have a list of points of contact for each state that we'll reach out to. If you're interested in being one of those points of contact, please feel free to reach out to me or the Technical Response Service. We also update on an ad hoc basis. So we follow various industry organization newsletters, and if we see a new law or incentive that has been passed, we will put it up on the AFDC, or if somebody emails us, tells us something has been added or expired or repealed, then we'll update it. But you can be rest assured that the website gets a good look at least every year for each incentive.
Great. And I am guessing that if folks on the webinar have updates on laws and incentives or anything like that, they can just send an email to you or the technical team?
Yep, absolutely. This page.
Wonderful. And I see that you are posting your email, so that's
right.
Great.
Yes. Yep, you can email me directly or the TRS.
Wonderful. All right, I think that we've come to the end of the questions from the participants. We're also at the end of the hour. Does anyone else have a question? If so, you can type it into the chat box. The presenters, I think, are able to stay on for a minute or two more, but I see that folks are beginning to drop off. So I think that since we are out of our questions, we will go ahead and wrap up. I would like to thank the presenters for this helpful information on the AFDC and the Sled tool, and I will turn it back over to our hosts at NREL, and thank you for hosting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for participating today. As I had mentioned, we will send out a link to today's recording as well as Some of the slides that you did see today, we'll go ahead and share those. We had a request for that, so happy to share those with everyone who participated. And thank you all. Thank you to all of our presenters and to Cassie as well and all of our organizations that helped bring this together. Hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you so much. This concludes today's webinar.